Hey y'all, I want to start off on this episode by apologizing for my very lengthy absence. Now, I've been terribly sick with a respiratory infection that has affected my asthma. I've been in bed a lot, I've been doing breathing treatments, taking antibiotics, doing all the stuff that I need to do to get better. Now, I'm still not back to myself 100%, but I'm a lot better than I was. And I even put on makeup today. Well, also during that time that I was sick and I was feeling sorry for myself, I toyed with the idea of not doing this podcast anymore. I mean, it does take a lot of my time to put episodes together, and I'm not making any money whatsoever. So I was having a hard time justifying spending so much time on it. But you know what? I don't want to quit doing the podcast. I really enjoy doing it. It's something that is mine and it's a hobby. And that's how it started off, as a hobby. So I'm okay with really not getting rich off of it or anything. And now that I've had the time to think it over, I've decided that in order to bring better quality episodes to you, I'm going to go back to doing just one episode each week. And that's how it started all the way back in the beginning. I feel like if I have more time for one single episode each week, I'll be able to bring you the true crime stories with more meat to them than having to cram in research and writing for 2 shows each week. And also, I feel like I won't feel as burned out if I cut it down to 1 show a week. So I'm going to stay with doing the weekly episode of Mystery, Murder, and Mayhem. Now, I'm going to change the night of that. I'm thinking of doing it on Wednesday night. So, because Mondays are just hectic with, kids in school, me in school, just life. But, so I think Wednesday night is going to be the best night for me to do that. And of course, when there's updates to stories like the Murdaugh trials, I'm going to, of course, be bringing you extra episodes of that. That's why I'm here today giving y'all this episode. And also today, I want to talk not just about the Murdaugh trial updates, but there's been something that's been going on here in South Carolina, off the coast of South Carolina. There's this young man named Tyler Dole who disappeared off the coast somewhere between North Carolina and South Carolina. And that happened at the end of January. And the reason why I haven't, other than being sick, but why I haven't said anything about it is because there's just so many misinformation or so much information that's not adding up, with what the family says. And then there's all these theories that the armchair detectives are coming out with. And I'm not insulting anybody by calling them an armchair detective, because that's what we all are, and that's why we're here for this type of podcast. But while I've been sick and in the bed, I've been down some crazy rabbit holes trying to figure it out. So until I can get it all sorted out, I'm just going to leave it at that for now. All right, y'all. So we're at the end of the 3rd week of the Murdaugh murder trials. And like I've said before, this trial is only for the murder charges and a few other ones that are related to that. We've got a lot to talk about, and it's going to be kind of lengthy for an update, but let's get into it. Now, like I said, it's just the murder trials. He's on trial. Alex Murdaugh is on trial for the murder of his wife Maggie and his son Paul. Now, for lack of better words, This trial has been somewhat of a real shit show, and it's not because of witnesses, but it's some of the stuff that's going on, in my opinion, with the defense attorneys. But I'll get to that in a few minutes. On day 4, and that was the next day after the first update that I gave y'all a couple weeks ago, the prosecutors in the case continued presenting their case. And 3 witnesses took the stand and described how the crime scene was handled after SLED agents arrived. And when defense attorney Dick Harpootlian cross-examined SLED agent Melinda Worley, he raised the theory of a second person being involved in the shootings, to which Worley didn't rule out the possibility. And after that, Harpootlian went back to his usual subject matter of the crime scene being contaminated by the first responders that, were the first ones there on the scene after he called 911. Well, also on the 4th day of the trial, SLED agent Jeff Croft testified about events on days following the double murders, and he talked at length about body cam footage on the grounds of the Moselle property. And later, that same agent recalled an interview where they were in one of the SLED agent's cars, and it had the dash cam footage. But at one point, Murdaugh said, quote, "I did him so bad," end quote. And in the courtroom, Murdaugh is seen shaking his head, and it appeared that he mouthed the words to his attorneys that that's not what I said. But like I said, it appears to be, what he mouthed to his, defense team. So I can't swear to that. That's just, what it looked like. But then the following day, hang on, let me back up because I want to talk about that for a minute. So, it could have been picked up as, instead of saying I did him so wrong, it could have very well been they did him so wrong, because how things like microphones, they just don't pick up everything accurately sometimes. And it's just left to our ears to, translate what we hear. But let's say he did say that. I mean, that's basically a confession that he did it. But, that's just my opinion. Now, I just can't even imagine being in that position where I would feel like I had to kill my family off because of everything else that's going on in my life. But then to say I did him so wrong. And I believe that was probably in reference to the state of the injuries, I guess you could say, that Paul had sustained from that gunshot wound. Because remember, I believe I told y'all in the last update that the back of Paul's head was destroyed. There was brain matter laying all over the place. But anyway, let's move on because we're not going to rehash what we've already said. Now, anyway, the defense, when they were talking to Croft, they asked him what he did after he heard those words from Murdaugh. And Croft replied that he made a mental note of it because they were still in the early stages of the investigation and that it wasn't an official interrogation. Well, later that day, a different SLED agent, Brett Dove, took the stand to educate jury and spectators on how cell phones work and how they gather information or evidence from them, from the cell phones. Well, the next day, a video was presented in court that prosecutions say placed Maggie, Paul, and Alex Murdaugh at the scene of the murders around the time that the murders took place. That video was obtained from Paul's cell phone, and although you really don't see anything other than one of the Murdaugh's dogs in the video, you can hear the voice of a female who is presumed to be Maggie, a male that is presumed to be Paul, and another male presumed to be Alex. And also on that day, so basically what they were getting at was that all three of them were at the dog kennels around the time of those murders. But anyway, on that day, a Snapchat employee took the witness stand to supply jurors with a timestamp from that video that was recorded by Paul on the day that they were killed. And after her testimony, the jury was dismissed for a while the hearing was held, or like it was like a side hearing, I guess you could say, was held about the admissibility of some of the evidence from the day before. Well, that brings us to Friday of not this past Friday, but the week before. And that day was started with testimony from a SLED fingerprint expert named Thomas Darnell. And he testified, sorry, see, I'm still not fully over this, but he testified that he didn't find any fingerprints on guns, ammo, or Paul's phone that could be identified. And he also said that this isn't all that unusual. You would think on a crime scene you would find somebody's fingerprints. Even, like, as far as Paul's phone, I guess they didn't pick up, either they didn't find any fingerprints at all, or they just didn't find any that weren't Paul's. I guess he didn't really go further into that. The next to testify was a SLED ballistics expert, and his name's Paul Greer. And Greer testified that the shell casings found near Maggie's body had markings on them that were identical to older casings that had been found near the main house and the shooting range. And of course, the defense objected throughout Greer's testimony, and as a matter of fact, the defense had tried unsuccessfully to have his testimony excluded altogether. And each of those objections were overruled by Judge Clifton Newman, and he even told the defense to, quote, deal with the state's witness. I just love that guy. He's like the best judge, I think, that we've got sitting on a bench in South Carolina. He doesn't take any bullshit in his courtroom. Now, when the defense cross-examined Greer, he would not say that he was 100% sure that the casings found by Maggie's body were fired from the same weapon as the ones found elsewhere on the family's property, but he did say that his opinion was that the same gun had made those markings. Then they talked about the shotgun that killed Paul, and Greer said that he was unable to ascertain whether any of the guns that had been seized by SLED in their investigation had been used in the murder. Now, that was the only reference to the gun that was used to kill Paul, not Maggie. And remember, there were two different guns used in the murders. So that brings us to just this past week. And on Monday, there was still some discussion about what should be admissible in court. And on Monday, that was mostly about the over 80 financial crime charges that Alex Murdaugh is accused of. The lead prosecutor, Creighton Water, says that those charges should be admissible as evidence because he believes it shows motive for Murdaugh murdering his son and wife. And you might recall that those murders took place on the same day, just mere hours after Murdaugh was accused by a fellow employee at the law firm of stealing somewhere around $792,000 from that law firm. But the defense says that those financial crime charges are highly prejudicial and simply doesn't make sense as a motive for murder. Now, this is just between me and you, but I think it makes perfect sense because if you've been listening to all my episodes on this whole fiasco, I told y'all early on that Maggie had found out that they were broke when a check that she had written at a charity luncheon bounced. And she confronted Alex Murdaugh about it. But y'all, that's really just my opinion. But anyway, Harpootlian called the prosecution's theory, quote, absurd and ludicrous. But good old Judge Newman said that he would give both sides a couple of days to hash it out, and all of that took place without the court or the jury in the courtroom. Well, before the jury was seated the next day, Judge Newman said that he would allow those charges, the financial charges, to be used as evidence because even though motive don't have to be established or proven, malice did, and that evidence of motive could be used to provide or to prove malice. And I really like Judge Newman. I think I've said that several times throughout this trial, but he's just this straight up stand up fella. Well, after the jury was seated, the first witness to take the stand for the day was the caregiver of Murdaugh's mother. And you might remember me mentioning before that Alex Murdaugh had tried using a visit to his mom, Libby, who suffers from Alzheimer's, as an alibi on the night of his murders, or the night of those murders. While on the stand, Miss Smith, and that's the caregiver, or one of the caregivers of Miss Libby, she admitted that Alex Murdaugh had pressured her to say that he was at his mother's house longer than he actually was. Now, Murdaugh said that his visit to his mom lasted between 30 and 40 minutes, but Miss Smith says that it was more like 15 or 20 minutes. Now, also on the witness stand on Tuesday was Jeannie Seckinger, and she was the chief financial officer of that now extinct Murdaugh family law firm. Seckinger testified that she was the one who confronted Alex Murdaugh about stealing that $792,000 from the family law firm on the morning of June 7th, 2021. And she went on to testify that after she accused Murdaugh of stealing the money, he looked at her with a sinister look that she'd never seen before from him, and then said, quote, "What do you need now?" And I'm going to let y'all take that for however way you want to take it. I have my thoughts on that. But that conversation between her and Murdaugh was cut short, though, because she said that during their conversation, he received word that his father was critically ill. Now, that wasn't a lie. The Murdaugh father was very ill and later passed away. But also taking the stand that day was Megan Fletcher, who specializes as a trace evidence analyst for SLED. And she testified that a large amount of gunshot residue was found on a blue poncho type raincoat that was found the following September in the upstairs of his mom's home. And Creighton Waters earlier had told the court that a witness had seen Murdaugh carrying something that looked like a blue tarp up the stairs of his mother's home in Hampton County. Now, that witness said it looked like a blue tarp, but if it's folded up or whatever, it could have very well have been that poncho type raincoat. Well, Wednesday's big news, this past Wednesday, the big news from the courthouse was that it had to be evacuated for a bomb threat. And according to a post on the Colleton County Sheriff's Office Facebook page, SLED said, quote, "A bomb threat was received by Colleton County courthouse personnel. The building has been evacuated, and SLED, along with the Colleton County Sheriff's Office, are investigating the threat. No additional information is available from SLED at this time," end quote. Now, the courthouse, it was evacuated around 12:30 p.m., but people were allowed back into the court 2 hours later. And when court reconvened after that bomb threat, an electronics engineer with the FBI, his name is Dwight, and I'm going to attempt to pronounce his last name, Falkowski. He testified shortly afterwards about the electronics system in Alex Murdaugh's vehicle. And he testified that he can tell when a car is in park or drive, but not when the car or vehicle is actually moving. And from what he testified, it backed up the claims that Murdaugh was at his mom's house for only around 20 minutes. Then on Thursday, The day started off with testimony from a Bamberg, South Carolina-based attorney, Chris Wilson. Wilson had been called Alex Murdaugh's best friend. Wilson had previously gave testimony at one of the trial's side hearings about Murdaugh's financial crimes. During that testimony, Wilson talked about a time that he said that Murdaugh had asked him for direct checks on a case that he and Murdaugh had worked on together. He said that normally fees are paid first to the law firm and then the law firm distributes it to attorneys. So he found that request to be unusual, but he said that it, quote, didn't set off any red flags at that time, end quote. Waters asked that if it was because they were friends, that it didn't set off any red flags. And Wilson said that, yeah, it was probably because they were friends that he didn't have any red flags popping up. Well, when he was cross-examined, he told the courtroom that on the night of the murders of Paul and Maggie, Alex Murdaugh was, quote, destroyed. And after his testimony, the court went into recess for a lunch break. Now, after the lunch break, the court heard from Michael Tony Satterfield, who is the son of the Murdaugh's longtime housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield. And you might remember that I mentioned on my initial series of episodes on this whole thing, Miss Satterfield died after an accident that she sustained at the Murdaugh home. And the circumstances of that accident have been considered suspicious. Tony Satterfield's testimony was given despite an objection from the defense. Harpootlian backed up that objection by saying that this was a murder trial and not a trial for the financial crime charges. Judge Newman, he overruled that objection, though, by saying in part, quote, I find this testimony is consistent with the state's theory of the defendant being in a frantic state, seeking to avoid disclosure of these financial crimes and thefts, end quote. Now, the defense later raised another objection when it learned that a witness for the state, Mark Tinsley, had donated to a GoFundMe set up for the caretaker, or for one of the caretakers of Alex Murdaugh's mom. And apparently, Tinsley donated $1,000. However, Tinsley was allowed to testify, but he wouldn't take the stand fully until on Friday. So that brings us to Friday, and Mark Tinsley, the attorney that I mentioned from the day before, he had donated to the GoFundMe. He was the first to take the stand that day, and he had started his testimony on Thursday, but it really didn't get into the meat of his testimony. So he got started back, the next morning. Also taking the stand that day was another former housekeeper for the Murdaugh family, and her name's Blanca Simpson. Miss Simpson, she told the court that Maggie Murdaugh was worried about the family's finances because of pending lawsuits that stemmed from Paul's boat crash. And her testimony caused a somewhat heated confrontation. And this is where I was talking about the shit show, okay? But there was a confrontation between the prosecution and the defense. Dick Harpootlian, he raised an objection to hearing about a conversation between Simpson and Maggie Murdaugh just a few months before their murders. And not only did he raise an objection, he slammed a stack of folders down on the defense table and called for a mistrial. A mistrial. But Judge Newman denied the objection and the motion for a mistrial. Now, I think I've mentioned it before, but I do love this judge. He's awesome. He doesn't put up with any foolishness. But anyway, Simpson testified that Maggie had told her that she felt that Alex wasn't being honest with her when it came to that lawsuit. And as far as the day of the murders, Simpson testified that when she arrived at the Moselle house that morning, Maggie and Paul were already gone, but Alex was still asleep. And she went on to say that when Alex left for work that morning, he was dressed in a seafoam green polo type shirt, khaki pants, a blue sports coat, and he had on brown leather shoes. And after he was or after this witness, Miss Simpson, was she was shown a Snapchat video from Paul's phone. She stated that the pants that Alex was wearing in that video seemed to be the same ones that he had left in that morning, but the shirt was different. And she also said that she never saw those clothes again. I wonder what that could mean. Now, the morning after the murders, Alex called her to tell her that Maggie and Paul had been killed. And after she visited with Alex and his other son, Buster, who were at Alameda, and that Alameda is his mom's house, she went to the Moselle house. And once she was there, she saw a few things that stood out to her, like a puddle of water next to a pair of khakis by the shower and a wet towel in the closet. And Simpson also told the court that she was asked to stay at Moselle with her husband until he was, as in the he being Alex Murdaugh, he decided what to do with the house. And another interesting point she made in her testimony is that when she visited Murdaugh at Alameda, he brought up the subject of the shirt he'd had on, mentioned he'd had a bad feeling, and then continued talking about the shirt in a way that made Simpson feel that he was trying to convince her that he was wearing a different shirt. Later on that Friday, on Friday of this past week, a friend of Paul's, his name's Nathan Tootin, he testified about working as a courier for the Murdaugh law firm. And he also said that he would often cash checks for Alex Murdaugh and bring him the cash. But just a few weeks before the murders, that stopped. And also testifying on Friday was another caretaker of Libby Murdaugh, who said that it wasn't often that Alex would visit late at night like he did on the night of the murders, but Paul was one that would come and visit often. And finally on Friday, an FBI Special Agent Matthew Wild took the witness stand to discuss cell phone data that had been collected from phones belonging to Alex, Maggie, and Paul on June the 7th, 2021. And that information gave investigators helpful insight into each of their movements that day. But he did say that he wasn't able to find location information for either Maggie or Alex. But Wild did say that based on cell phone tower information, it placed Alex at Moselle until 9:10 before showing movement, and that's 9:10 p.m., before it showed movement toward and around Alameda, which, like I said, is his parents' estate, and then he headed back to Moselle around 9:46. Now, one thing I didn't mention in the rundown of the courthouse events up until now was the testimony given by Murdaugh's former paralegal. Her name is Annette Griswold. And the reason I left it out until now is because it really nearly deserves its own episode, but I'm going to include that with today's episode. Now, Griswold, she took the witness stand on Wednesday of this past week, and she testified that she felt betrayed when she found out that he had lied and manipulated to steal millions of dollars from his clients. But she also told the court that Murdaugh was a dedicated family man, and she went on to say that he was so distraught after the murders of his wife and son that he could no longer stay in the house the family lived in. And y'all remember I talked about he went to rehab in Florida. Well, Griswold said that while he was there, Murdaugh sent the law firm's paralegals text messages with these lengthy apologies for his wrongdoings at the law firm. And at one point, she said that Murdaugh had her start routing attorney fees from settlements that they would receive to an account called Forge. And the way he explained it to her, it made sense. So she never really questioned him about it. She also described several times when disbursement sheets for settlements, which were normally handled by her if it had been one of Alex's cases, had been handled by someone else. And once the accounts payable department received those disbursement sheets, they had a lot of questions because none of it made any sense. And one of those occasions was while she was out of work because she had had surgery. And the other time that this happened, she had left the office to take her mom to an eye doctor. Now, to me, it's just funny that these happened while she was away. And on that second occasion, when she was with her mom at the eye doctor's office, not only was attorney fees, but money for a client being routed to that forged account. The prosecutor also pointed that out, and she backed up all of that. Well, she went on to say that in hindsight, it was easy to see that those sheets were being sent over to the accounts payable people when she was away from the office. And also when a lot of people were leaving for the day because it was around 10 minutes before 5 each time. And this is big red flags. And as far as the time that happened when she took her mom to the eye doctor, she says that later she asked Murdaugh why those disbursement sheets had went out, because it was from her understanding that since the other part of that case wouldn't be settled for another year. Murdaugh responded to her, though, that he had gotten permission, since the money would be sitting there for another year. They were going to send it to the forge account so that it could draw interest, and that money would draw interest not just for the law firm, but for the client too. And she was shown paperwork from the Thomas More case, and you might recall that's the state trooper that had had an accident while on the job and had went to Murdaugh for legal help. But she showed him she was shown paperwork from that case, and she confirmed that Murdaugh had actually forged, y'all, Thomas More's signature on the documents. I mean, this man just has no limits of what he'll do. But anyway, Griswold also testified that she had talked to Jeannie Seckinger about her concerns, and on June the 7th, 2021, like I mentioned earlier about Jeannie's testimony, Jeannie went to Murdaugh's office to speak with him about missing checks from another lawsuit. Well, later that same night, while Griswold was asleep, she received multiple text messages and voicemails, and one of those voicemails was from Alex Murdaugh's brother, Randy. And when she returned Randy's call, she was told that Maggie and Paul had been found murdered. She said that after the murders, all the focus was taken off of finding out what had happened to those fees checks that were missing, and the focus was on making sure everyone at the office was safe. Those missing checks weren't thought about again until September. Griswold said that she went into Murdaugh's office to look for a file that she couldn't put her fingers on, and when she found it in his office and opened it, a check fell out of it. When she picked it up, she realized that it was one of the missing checks. And that check had been written to Richard Alexander Murdaugh instead of to the law firm. And that's when she had proof that Murdaugh had been lying to her the entire time. And when she returned to her desk, Griswold called Seckinger in and told her what she had found. And Seckinger told Griswold that they had ran reports and realized that there was more than just those missing checks going on. So the following day, Murdaugh was let go from the family law firm. Now, there's a lot more to her testimony, and actually I feel like, and this is just in my opinion, her testimony painted the picture of everything that happened before and after the murders, as far as like what's going on in the law firm and all that stuff. But I'm going to include the link to the video of her testimony in the episode description. All right, well, Ariel just busted in and wanted to say hey to y'all, but so that's really all. I know it was a long update, and I apologize for that. I'm going to be back this week, like I said, on Wednesday, with an all-new episode of Mystery, Murder, and Mayhem. And throughout the week, if there are like any new developments worth sharing from the courtroom, but definitely by the weekend I'll have the week's update for y'all. And I would think it wouldn't be too long before they start wrapping this case up. But anyway, y'all have a good night, and thanks for joining me.